Good morning and a very warm welcome to our first webinar of 2023. We'll be looking at navigating the future of HR in Africa, and we'll be looking at some key trends for the year ahead. Now, my name is Oliver Nathan. I am the Head of Learning at Africa People Advisory Group, and I'm joined today with my colleague, Janine Schwartz. Janine, would you like to introduce yourself? You'll just need to pop yourself on unmute.
Sorry, that is the trend for the new year. In 2023, we're still struggling with the mute button. Thanks, Oliver, for the opportunity and for everyone joining. My name is Janine Schwartz. I'm also part of the Africa People Advisory Group team in South Africa mainly, and looking forward to share the trends and our insights with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janine, and a welcome to those who've just joined the webinar. A few things, please feel free to ask us questions as we go through the presentation in the Q&A portion of Zoom or in the chat. And from there, towards the end of the webinar, we will take an opportunity to answer as many of those questions as we can. The webinar will be fun, participatory, so we will be launching some polls, and we would really love to know what your thoughts are. We'd love your participation on this webinar. And with that said, let us kick off with the first poll. We'd love to know where you are from. So let me launch poll number 1 and give us your feedback in terms of which region you are located in. You should be able to see the poll on the screen. Okay, so we've got a number of people from Southern Africa, a good contingent from West Africa joining us, some participants from East Africa, from North Africa, Europe, and Asia. No one from the Americas so far. We will give it a few more moments for you to participate in this particular poll. Okay, so it's looking like at around 52% of our audience today is from Southern Africa. And that is followed by West Africa and East Africa. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. And I think what is really important and really fantastic for us to see is that we have representation from across the continent. And that is something that is very close to our heart in terms of what we do. Let us jump into the webinar by looking at some of the trends for the year ahead.
Have you felt that it's harder to create an engaging employee experience in a hybrid or remote environment? You're not alone. 67% of HR and L&D professionals felt the same way in a recent survey conducted by the Ken Blanchard Companies. When asked to select their top objectives for the coming year, respondents identified developing leadership bench strength, attracting and retaining high performers, providing a great employee experience. When asked to identify what a great employee experience looked like, respondents singled out building trust between managers and direct reports, addressing workload balance to avoid burnout, connecting work to purpose. 2023 will bring new challenges, new skills, and new opportunities.
That video provides some really quite vague outlines in terms of what are the concrete trends in human resources and maybe in learning and development a little bit more broadly. And the objective of this survey is to take you through just a few pieces of our new ways of working study in 2022. And so how the webinar is structured is to look at what we identified in 2022 as a trend and see what we believe the extensions of this particular report in terms of trends will be in 2023. A lot of the trends that we will be looking at look at how organizations are developing a people-centric culture in the organization in 2023 and the absolutely critical role that HR has to play in this. I think before we jump into them, we need to understand a little bit around the context of our changing world. In 2022 and moving into 2023, I mean, hybrid working models have really taken the world by storm. But what we do see is a gradual return back to brick and mortar offices. So as much as remote working and hybrid working might be something that employees value, there's equally been a shift sort of back to the office. In 2022, we identified the Great Resignation, the first initial signs of a Great Resignation trend in the continent more broadly, as well as that of quiet quitting. It'll be sort of remain to see how important these are for us in 2023 and whether this is something that is applicable to our continent. In 2022, we identified the rise of data, insights, and technology in the human resources space. And I think what is really, really new for 2023 and what is going to impact us greatly one way or another is the rise of generative AI and machine learning programs such as ChatGPT. It'll be interesting to see whether these enhance our expertise as HR practitioners or potentially disrupt HR as we know it. I'm going to hand you over to Janine to take us through a very short recap of the 2022 New Ways of Working study, and from there we will move into some of the new trends for the year ahead. Go ahead, Janine.
Thank you, Oliver. As we all know, it's really difficult to get data from Africa, in Africa. And our purpose of this New Ways of Working study was to get insights, to get data, and to provide organizations with access to reliable data-driven insights to better our decision-making, to proactively plan going forward. So as Oliver mentioned, we launched our first study in 2021, and we did the second version last year, mid-2022. We had a great increase in terms of participation, and the slide just shows you at the bottom part is the participation in 2021, where we had 152 participants, represented by 134 companies, 14 countries, and 21 industries. We saw a slight increase, which we were really excited about, and we're looking forward to launching new insights, new reports this year again. But we had 188 participants from 148 companies, 21 countries, and 20 industries. And this is just to give you a view of our aim is really to provide insights for Africa, from Africa, to make it our own, to not just work with global trends, but really get it closer to home, getting closer to in our organizations. What are we seeing? What are we experiencing as managers, as leaders, as the HR industry, and how we can leverage from this data and work with it going forward. So that's just a quick background on who participated in the study last year in 2022. Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you so much, Janine. So into the trends. A good starting point for us is to look at the work of Josh Bersin. Now, at Africa People Advisory Group, we are really quite big fans of Josh Bersin. We think that he has got a lot of good things to say about what is next for HR. So please feel free to go onto the Josh Bersin Company website and download this full report. And I think a few selected trends, globally speaking, for 2023. Number one is really looking at a new multifaceted workforce. So the diversity of the workforce, certainly from an age and scarcity of skills perspective, will emerge and accelerate in 2023. Something that is nothing new, but we really have to start to take seriously is around the convergence of industries and disruptors coming into our particular industry or our particular sector from outside. Nothing new, but we really have to take that seriously. I think something that's very close to my heart is that every company in 2023 will really have to get serious and pragmatic about skills, about rapidly upskilling employees to be able to cope with disruptions and innovation in a much more effective and rapid manner. Employee experience, again, something that is really close to our heart, and from Josh Burson's perspective, employee experience will really shift beyond just experience towards people sustainability. So what are we doing in our organizations to keep our people and ensure that our people are kept sustainably so that we can continue to develop and acquire the talent that we need into the future? Every company will need to revisit its leadership model. I think in particular in terms of the rise of artificial intelligence and how we use that to augment expertise, we will really need to look at how leadership will need to change in order to take into account the changing technology and data environment that we are in. New models of performance management will really take hold. We've talked quite extensively about performance coaching and how performance management is changing, and we will cover some of that in this particular webinar. CEOs and CHROs will need to increase their focus on well-being. And lastly, people analytics will evolve into talent intelligence. So it's not just about finding and making use of people data, but it is really about producing intelligent insights so that we can manage talent a little bit more effectively into the future. So a nice perspective from Josh Burson, but not necessarily that instructive in terms of what it might mean for us here on the African continent. So in terms of our 6 emerging trends from the New Ways of Working study in 2022, we have provided some 2023 updates for you. So just to refresh your memory, if you maybe have not read through our New Ways of Working report for 2022, there are 6 key trends that we have identified, which I will take you through very briefly. Number 1 is that traditional staffing and organization structures are under pressure. 2, the African continent is showing early signs of a great resignation. Number 3, remote and hybrid working models can drive productivity gains. Number 4, performance management as a practice is really busy transforming on the African continent broadly. Number 5, the post-pandemic workplace is highly people-centric, and there are key items around employee experience as well as in terms of leadership that will either help us to be more people-centric or will detract away from that. Lastly, the HR skills development agenda is clear, and now is the time for taking action. Right, so looking at the first trend that we identified in our New Ways of Working report, really around traditional staffing and organization structures, we found the following. So organizations reported, 39% of organizations compared to the previous year indicated that there was some sort of organizational structure change or job changes that were on their radar for the year ahead. Significant movement in the level of intention to change those structures and embark on job redesign, as well as to flatten those organizational structures, to reduce complexity and increase simplicity where possible. Well, why would they want to do this? Well, our respondents really reported that there is a need for us to become a lot less bureaucratic, as well as more agile in terms of how we manage. The in-demand skills for recruiters, I think in 2023 remain what they are in 2022. So technical skills specific to industry are really, really important. And this has an important bearing in terms of the structure of the organization. We need to play to the skills and strength of the people that we are hiring in our organizations. Second is leadership and management skills. And I think just for our purposes, data science and analytics skills are really, really important in terms of organizational change. And lastly, in terms of technology. And we'll talk quite a lot about performance management and the changing role that performance management actually plays in managing people effectively and getting the best out of them. Our 2022 recommendations were to critically review the organization structure and seek ways to try and optimize that to ensure that people are performing at their best, using technology as an enabler to help us get the structure of the organization right and get the jobs and the roles that people embark on really right, and to speak to the organization structure and what we are trying to do as an organization to be successful and achieve our goals. Another recommendation with regards to this particular trend is ongoing and regular review of job grades, especially if promotion is based on tenure and not necessarily complexity. What does this mean for 2023? We'll talk about building a pipeline of talent with future skills, and that is absolutely important to 2023. But the trend in 2023 for trend 1 is that those traditional staffing and organization structures are likely to become under even more increased pressure in 2023 as companies no longer necessarily adapt to, but fully adopt the new ways of working, whether it's hybrid working or remote working. What is important here is that this may involve further decentralization of decision-making and flattening of those hierarchies. How do we respond as an organization to this particular trend? Organization design frameworks such as holacracy, as well as scaled agile framework, can really help us to decentralize that decision-making. And why would we want to do that? To promote further agility and the ability of our organizations to be able to respond to threats, challenges, opportunities in a much more flexible manner. Number 2, something that is very close to my heart, is OKRs, objectives and key results. A focus on the result of the work that is done rather than how the work was done or how an individual team or organization performed. What is much more important is for us to focus on the results. Hence, OKRs with KPIs that are linked to achieving those key results is really, really important in 2023. Lean Six Sigma or lean management frameworks can potentially also help us to identify and eliminate waste and inefficiencies in the organization. Let me hand you over to Janine to take us through the Great Resignation. Thank you, Janine.
Thanks, Oliver. You can go to the next slide. So the second trend that we quickly want to just touch on is, by now, most of us have heard about the term, the Great Resignation. And the question remains really, is it just something that we see globally or in America or in the UK, or is it something that we see on our own continent as well? So that's why we posted the question in the study. It really is something that we can explore further and investigate over time, but there is some early indications that Africa is already also starting to experience some type of or version of the Great Resignation. So we asked some of the participants, and 51% of the participants responded to saying that we've been observing an increase in resignations in the organization. And one of the key main reasons for that resignations was linked to, finding a new position. So we can pose the question, why are people moving to other positions? What's the reason behind that? And that takes me to the next slide, Oliver. The recommendations, there's a few recommendations that we made in the study last year. And one is really to strengthen the talent management strategy. And it's to counteract that potential impact of the Great Resignation. What becomes important, you can show the next two as well. Thanks, Oliver. What becomes important is that we develop or firm up our retention strategy. And it's critical to identify who is our talent. So it's not just about, people moving from one job to another, or maybe moving from country to another country, but we need to identify, and that's why point 3 is so critical, is really to understand our data. And if we don't have data, we don't have that insight, we can't proactively manage that. And I think that's where one of our main challenges becomes highlighted if we don't participate in having conversations like exit interviews, trying to determine why is this trend, in our organization? Are we losing people due to, are their drivers changing in terms of money? Is it because of flexible working environments? Is it just because of development? Becoming rather to get that insights into Why are we losing our top talented people? Who are those talented people that we are losing, and what's the reasoning behind that? So that's just our recommendations in terms of our study that we found. And then the next slide is really to talk about what is the trends for 2023 in terms of this actual Great Resignation. And from what we can see is that there might still be an increase in the next few years. The job market becomes more dynamic, new opportunities arise. I'm sure that you have all experienced people looking at, alternative ways of doing their job, or getting side hustles, or seeking other opportunities in other countries. So that's really being flagged as a risk, especially, on talented level employees, where scarce skills becomes a red flag, or a risk of losing those talented people and the skills, not just the people with that. So in terms of what can we do, just the next slide, how can we respond to counteract this Great Resignation, this big buzzword that's going around? And again, just back to the point that we've made in terms of data. So data can give us a lot of insight, whether it's, data that's qualitative, where you can see numbers, or you have conversations with people. But one way is to do engagement surveys to help assess employee engagement and satisfaction levels, or dipstick surveys. You can do polls like we've been doing in this webinar as well. So there's many ways to just gain some information and track and monitor where your employees are at. Employee retention analysis, like I've mentioned now, to help identify the factors that contribute to the employee turnover. It's critical to identify the reasons behind it's going to happen, people are going to leave, but how can we counteract that? What can we implement? How can we proactively manage, our retention? And then the last one is succession planning frameworks. Help us to identify and groom our future leaders, to make sure that they are developed, make sure that we invest in them, and make sure that we are future-proof for, the next generation, or the next 5 years in the company. So those are the three main areas that we, in terms of this prediction and in terms of the Great Resignation, that we would suggest on how to respond in terms of that. So we can go now to, that's the second trend, the Great Resignation. Then the third one that's also on everyone's mind, and there's a lot of talk about it. Oliver also referred to it earlier in the webinar, is remote and hybrid working models drive productivity gains. And there's a real big debate, and we've seen a lot of changes between, companies going fully remote, having hybrid models, or going back to the organization. So this is obviously questions that we've asked in our study. Oliver, if you can just share that slide, please. Sorry, we're going to do a poll first. Oliver, you can run with the poll and share the results with the group, please.
Thank you so much. Let me quickly run our poll on hybrid work. So we are interested in knowing this year whether you currently work in a hybrid or fully remote working model, so we can have a short discussion on what the trends are between last year and this year. Okay, I see about 20% of us have participated. Up to 50% participation. Let's give it a moment more for people to complete this particular poll. Interesting. Okay, I see 71% of us have participated. I am going to end the poll now and share the results. And there are some very interesting results that we see here. So in terms of the results, whether you work in a hybrid or fully remote working model, at the moment, 56% of you say, no, you do not. You have returned back to the office, which is quite different from when we ran this poll when we did our New Ways of Working launch in July of last year. there were many more people who were involved in remote or hybrid working arrangements of some kind. So just an interesting finding there for 2023. I'm going to move on to the next slide and allow Janine to talk through this particular trend. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. Thank you for everyone participating in the poll. I think it's really interesting, and as Oliver mentioned, it's different from a year ago, and I think we've been seeing that with our clients as well. Is there's a slight movement back to, especially depending on the industry that we work in, banking industry, manufacturing industries. There's a lot of companies, pharmaceuticals that we've seen in our client base of people going back to the office more and more, or it started off with 2 days moving to 3 days a week, and I think we're going to see that trend. But I do think the hybrid model is still in place, and there's still a lot of changes that happened with COVID, and there's a long way before I think people are going to feel settled in what is working for them, and that's really, I think, critical questions organizations should ask, and you will see it in our recommendations as well. But just to get back to the study, we've asked the participants if they've got policies in place in terms of remote working, and 67% in the previous study increased to 71% of organizations indicated that they actually do have a policy in place for remote working. And 28% of the respondents indicated that they still do not have remote working policies in place. 30% of companies still expect the employees to work from the office. And I think we will see maybe that percentage go up as you'll increase in the next year or two. Oliver, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so our recommendations for 2022, and it's really, like we've mentioned again, it's really data-driven again. It's really to understand what does your employees want and how does it fit in with your delivery model. And I think that's a key part is you need to have both. What will work for the employee won't necessarily be aligned with the strategy of the business and what we need to deliver. So it's really how do we get both to work together? And how do we align whatever our policy is it from the office, is it remote, is it a hybrid model, to really align with the employee and the strategy or the model of the organization. And it's best to listen to employees, get to the voice of the employees, get to that feedback. What are they experiencing? How can you implement other things? What is doable within the parameters of the strategy or the model of the organization? The second recommendation is to develop a policy that works for all parties, like I've mentioned, is really to get to that, middle point that works for everyone and to get all the perspectives, and also monitor productivity and performance and morale. And what are we seeing if we change the policy to everyone is back at the office? What is the impact on our employees? What is the impact on productivity? And then the last point is just to continue this benchmark, because developments, as we've seen now, it's already different from what we've seen last year. So it's critical that we keep on benchmarking, continue to get insights from our people, and to make sure that we are still aligned. Are we doing it right? Is there more remote working needed? Is it better to be in the office? Is there better collaboration when we are at the office? And so forth. So I think it's critical that we continue to benchmark and see if we've implemented this policy or this strategy a year ago, is it still relevant? Is it still having an impact? And are people still satisfied in their working environment? So that's just the recommendation. So the next slide is just to look at the trends for 2023. And like we've said, remote and hybrid working models are likely to continue to gain in popularity, I think, especially from the employee point of view. While companies are realizing the cost and productivity benefits of a more flexible and decentralized workforce, the benefits can only be realized when employees have adequate access to technology. And what we've seen in the research and by just consulting with our clients, especially in Africa, is this might become one of the biggest challenges, is yes, we can work remotely, but we don't have the resources or the technology to keep that going. So that is one of the, I think, one of the challenges that we experience on our continent in some of our countries that might not be a global trend. The appetite for hybrid working arrangements will therefore differ vastly from country to country, and I think from industry to industry as well. So it's not just what country that you're working in, but it's also what industry and what does it allow. That will also have an impact on what the organization will decide to do in terms of this different working models going forward. So how can we respond? So this is quite a controversial topic. We're going to run a poll again just to get your insights on this. But one of the trends that we've seen is time tracking software that can monitor and assess employees. And there's also different levels around that. It's really, you can go and see if people, spend time on their computer, or they can log when they've been active. So there's different ways of doing that, but it is controversial and not everyone is going to feel comfortable with that. So we would like to get your insights in terms of what is your feeling around having software like that in place. Collaboration and communication tools, like we all know, Slack, Microsoft, Oliver has mentioned ChatGPT or Zoom, or all vehicles that we can use to collaborate better, promote communication, and manage our remote teams better. And then something that we've also seen is really virtual meeting best practices to ensure that you have effective communication and engagement. So I think we've all been we had to change overnight from being in the office together, being around a table together, and doing meetings online, and there's not been really, any etiquette around that, or how do I present myself online? What is the rules and the not rules? What is, just how do we run meetings that's effectively and we don't waste time? And I think that becomes important to ensure that we all aligned in terms of how do we best optimize our time if we do it virtually. So I'm going to just give over to Oliver to run the poll for us in terms of that controversial question that we've asked. Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks, Janine. In terms of the poll, we'd like your view on whether you agree with the implementation of time tracking software, particularly if you are working from home or working elsewhere aside from the physical office. So with that, let me launch this poll. For this particularly thorny topic, we'd love to hear your voice. Right, we have about 50% participation so far. I'm going to give it a few more moments. Some very interesting results are coming up here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll here and show you the results. So, very interestingly, 48% of you said that yes, indeed, you agree with the implementation of time tracking software, while 36% of you said no, you don't agree with that, and a good proportion of you, 17%, are undecided. Now, that is a result that I didn't anticipate. My thinking was that, honestly, there would be more disagreement with regards to the implementation of time tracking software. So that is a really, really interesting result to see. So I think the desire to have a good sense of how people are working and how productive people are being is still very much in place and intact. Hence the interest in potentially exploring time tracking software for our remote and hybrid workers. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. Okay, moving on to trend number 4. Performance management as a practice is busy transforming before our very eyes. So here's a great graph to just give us some explanation of how performance management is changing in 2022, and we'll talk about 2023 in a moment. But suffice to say, we are moving away from the word performance management more closely towards enabling performance, performance enablement. I've already mentioned the importance of OKRs rather than just KPIs or KPAs, and no more bell curves and forced ranking in terms of how people are performing against our chosen metrics in terms of how we measure people. Rather a development focus. So ratings are making a comeback, but not at the cost of development focus. This is an incredibly important part of how performance management is changing. In terms of engaging, ongoing performance management or ongoing performance enablement rather than it being quarterly or every 6 months or annually, and a much bigger focus on team-based goals is what we found in 2022. And then very importantly, tech-enabled. Multi-layer continuous feedback, the adoption of technology through which to do our performance enablement, and then very importantly for us is simplicity in terms of the process. In terms of the planned changes, from priority perspective, 22% of our respondents in the New Ways of Working 2022 study really mentioned that implementing new technology is what's going to help them to get performance enablement right. 16% then said, introduce those team-based KRAs or KPIs might be of importance to them. And number 3 is a move to measure output as opposed to productivity. So to look at the results more than how the results were necessarily achieved. It doesn't mean that looking at the means to achieving results is not important, but just the emphasis is looking at the results in terms of how we were able to achieve the goals we set for ourselves as an organization. Our 2022 recommendations: develop an output-based system of key performance indicators linked to OKRs, and we'll talk a little bit more about OKRs for 2023. Really, really important. Number 2 is to be intentional about how we introduce the measurement of behavior. So that behavior-based feedback is really important to not just give sort of technical feedback in terms of how the person performed against the technical aspects of their particular job. And lastly, enabling the process through technology. Performance management, as we know it, can be really quite cumbersome and take up significant amounts of time and volume. And we don't want performance management to be reduced to a tick box exercise. Hence, using technology to help us get more value out of the process in a shorter period of time is what is important in 2022 and moving into 2023 in order to make performance enablement a really valuable exercise for employees and for the organization more broadly. In terms of our 2023 prediction for this trend, so again, performance management systems are likely to become more agile and more continuous in 2023. Annual performance evaluations are not sufficient to necessarily meet the needs of a rapidly changing business environment. Instead, and what is really important for us is the notion of performance coaching and giving continuous feedback and development opportunities rather than just measuring people in terms of how they have performed against a set of KPIs. How do we respond most effectively to this? I think ongoing use of 360-degree feedback assessment tools can help us to gather that continuous data and continuous feedback to employees from employees, and as well as provide opportunities for feedback to come from different stakeholders, giving different perspectives on performance and how results were achieved. OKRs with supportive KPI metrics can help us align individual and team performance with the organizational goals a little bit more effectively. And very importantly for us, learning and development management systems can really help to track employee development against the skills that need to be developed and provide those growth opportunities, as can the use of extensive performance coaching and ongoing feedback. looking at the post-pandemic workplace and whether that will continue to be highly people-centric. So a lovely quote from Simon Sinek, who is a leadership development practitioner and thought leader. He says that customers will never love a company until the employees love it first. So there are key things that leaders need to do from last year into 2023 that will help employees to start to give their best to the organization right now and moving into the future. In terms of our 2022 study, what we found was that to enable new ways of working, new leadership competencies have been emerging. There are 5 which we found in our study. Number 1 is to be able to connect authentically, to communicate clearly, to lead with agility, to build collaborative relationships, and to engage on a process of continuous improvement. These are the 5 key leadership competencies for 2022 that are important. Similarly, in terms of people centricity, we saw the rise of employee experience across the continent in our 2022 study. 76% of organizations are measuring employee engagement and forms of employee engagement. A full survey every 1 to 2 years. We saw that 60% of organizations are taking engagement and a move towards experience a little bit more seriously in 2022. Many organizations think that engagement and EX is one and the same, but it's important to note that employee experience covers so much more than engagement. We will be running another webinar later on this year. We ran one last year with regards to EX, and we will be running another one later on this year where we will start to flesh out and unpack the work that we are doing in the employee experience space. One disappointment from our study in 2022 was D&I, so we didn't see nearly as much transformation in the diversity and inclusion space that we would have hoped to see. So it remains to be seen what happens with regards to diversity and inclusion in organizations across the continent in 2023. In terms of our recommendations from 2022, leadership does set the tone for what is done and how it is done. So leaders should not underestimate the impact that they have on people. Employee wellness is absolutely key and critical, and then that focus on employee experience is really what we need to be doing. What are our predictions for the year ahead with regards to trend number 5? So we believe the post-pandemic workplace is likely to become even more people-centric in 2023, with a greater emphasis on well-being and engagement. So EX will really start to take off on the continent, enabled by, very importantly, artificial intelligence-based assessment technologies to help us craft unique and compelling employee value propositions to help us to retain and acquire top talent. It remains to be seen whether diversity, equity, and inclusion will accelerate this year. What can we do? Employee well-being assessments over and above engagement assessments can really help us to assess well-being and identify areas for improvement. The engagement surveys, again, there's no reason to stop with that, to assess employee engagement and satisfaction levels with the organization. And very importantly, and this is quite new for us, is diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment tools that can help us identify those areas for improvement, track progress in creating that really inclusive and equitable work culture. Let me hand you over to Janine to take us through our final trend for the year ahead. Go ahead, Janine.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, the last trend that we want to discuss is HR skills development. And we're saying the agenda is clear. It is now time to take action. As I think we all know this, Oliver, you can go on. The skills required from HR resources professionals have really started to shift around in the recent years. And I think from an HR perspective, we want to play a bigger part. We want to play a bigger role. We want to have a voice. And we've been seeing it in the trends in terms of the skills that's required. We've asked the question, what is the more critical skills that HR professionals must develop to enable us to do this new way of working? And here you can see from the results, it's HR, people analytics, business acumen, strategic workforce planning, organizational design. Those are the top ones that came through in terms of the results and in terms of our study that we've asked. So the big focus on people analytics, business acumen, and workforce planning. So the new roles for HR, what other new skills should the HR profession build to enable this? So these are just other three important aspects that we highlighted and that we gained from the data and the research that we've done. And it's really leadership coaching and organizational structure designer, being designers in the company. We should as HR play a leading role in identifying and developing a new breed of leadership skills, really coaching, having a coaching mindset and adapting to the new ways of working. And then I think, which is close to my heart again, is really being a cultural ambassador. And as Oliver mentioned previously, employee experience is becoming such a critical part in the organization, and to really become a facilitator and a voice for this. The discipline of employee experience is slowly starting to take shape and significant impact. It can have a significant impact in organizations if we approach this in the right way. And I think then one big critical component is employee wellness, and to be a champion of that. Yes, it's 3 years post-COVID, but I think there's a lot of people still, feeling the impact of that. And besides COVID and all of the global challenges that we are experiencing, we need to look after our people. We need to look after ourselves, and content like burnout becomes more critical and more talked about, and making sure that we check in, having the difficult conversations, checking in into our employees. And we as HR professionals need to, lead in terms of being champions, in terms of, wellness, mental wellness, that's critical, and that it plays an important role, and that we have the conversations around that. Just in terms of our recommendations is identify future-focused skills for HR in your own business. I think it's important, if you look at the skills that we've identified in our study, is to go and ask the questions. Do we have the skills within our teams? Do we need to develop it? Or is it something that is lacking? Or are we actually doing very well in this? Are we at the forefront of, HR and people analytics? Are we doing well with, are we business savvy and all of that? So we can ask those type of questions in terms of our skills and in our profession, and are people taking us seriously, because we can have these talks and we know what is business all about, and we are in the ambassadors of going forward. And then audit the HR skills and invest in long-term development initiatives. This is just another recommendation is you don't know what to develop if you don't know where we are at. And this is really at the heart of this recommendation, is to let's take an audit or get insights. Where are we at? Does it align with the future trends? What can we proactively do to get ourselves there? And are we focusing on the right things, on the right skills? And are we empowering our HR people to play this role and to develop this new skills that is needed for the future? Just in terms of 2023, the prediction for this trend, with accelerated change in the business, like I've mentioned, we'll have to invest our cost and effective training. And I think what we've seen with our clients as well is there's a lot more focus on, are we doing the right training, or are we investing in the wrong places? So this will help you, if you have insights in terms of where are we at, to make sure that we invest the money that we do have for training, and focus that interventions at the right places, and make sure that we do upskill our people with the skills that's needed. It may involve rapidly upskilling and reskilling our employees using micro-learning based approaches. as well as investing in technologies like we've mentioned before, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and how we can improve these processes and decision making. So new specialized roles might come to the forefront, such as engineers, to engage appropriately and ethically with AI, because it can also strengthen the position of companies in Africa and in our continent. So what actions can we take in terms of this trend? How can we respond? One of the things that we've been helping our clients with, that we've seen a real big uptake in the past year, is really competency-based frameworks, so that we can assist our employees and assist our leaders to identify what is the skills and the knowledge needed to meet the current need, but also the future business needs. So it's really important to be able to voice that and have that in place to make sure that there's alignment, but that people know the why and the how behind what we are doing and how we should be doing it. AI-driven learner experience platforms with built-in micro-learning opportunities can also help to rapidly up or reskill employees and track their development and growth. So there's many ways that we, it's much easier these days to access learning. There's other ways of doing the traditional around the table learning. So there's many ways that we can upskill ourselves. There's many platforms that we can access. And then HR analytics and data visualization tools can also help to collect, analyze, and make data-driven decisions. I think we've talked a lot about data in this webinar and how critical it is. But if we don't know how to interpret the data and play around and tell the story with the data, we're also going to struggle. So I think having the skill to visualize the data and to present it in a more digital way will also go a long way in telling the story and getting the insights from the data. I think that is the end of our trends. Just on the last few slides, Oliver, you can go to the closing remarks slide. I think just to summarize everything in terms of what we've discussed today. So from our view, our call to action is of the study is these 3 critical focus areas. Is to fast track efforts on employee experience, start somewhere. And if we start right now, there's not a better day than to start than today. The next one is to make appropriate and ethical use of artificial intelligence technologies to enhance HR. I think there's a lot more to explore here, especially on the African continent, in terms of AI and the way forward and how we can leverage from that and how we can use it in our organizations. And from an Africa point of view, I think there's still a lot to be done and still a lot to understand, but to see and how we can optimize it and what impact it can have in terms of how we deliver, in terms of how we add value. It will become critical in the future. And then the last one of the areas that we said is to adopt a proactive approach to the risk of the Great Resignation. And it's really just links back to what we said around that trend, is to have the conversations, pick up on the trends, adapt, pivot if you need to, but it's really to gain that insights to make the decisions going forward, to counteract the Great Resignation and make sure that you keep your top talent and your scarce skills in your organization longer. I think that is it from my side, Oliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janine. We have a few moments left. I see there are a couple of questions here. So yes, we will be able to share the presentation with you. Thank you so much, Tabo, joining in late, joining in from East Africa. Thank you so much. Well done. Good slides and managing the topic. Will the slides be shared? Yes, absolutely, Cole. The slides will be shared. Now, I wanted to find out if there were any further questions you might have for us. Please use the Q&A function. We will give you a moment to post any questions you might have. I've just enabled the chat for everyone, so you should be able to post a question in the chat if you do have one. Is there data on salary survey? So with regards to that, James, I mean, we collect our own data on salary survey, and we sell that as part of our the consulting that we do. With regards to that, there are obviously big global providers of salary data, and in terms of what's going to happen with salary surveys into the year ahead, I mean, I think absolutely being able to remunerate people effectively and ensure that those salaries are properly benchmarked either internally or to the market is absolutely critical. Anonymous attendee asked, do we have any certifications? No, we currently do not offer any certifications. Do you have relevant examples on people analytics? What can be measured and how will this result in talent intelligence? That's a very good question, Candace. I mean, we work with organizations really quite extensively in helping them to develop their thinking and some of the frameworks around how to use people analytics. And I think for us, our entry point into that is really looking at employee experience and what are we doing to help organizations to analyze and collect data on employee sentiment and doing some sentiment analysis to be able to get an understanding around talent intelligence. So not just collecting the data, but rather producing really effective insights, which will help us to reveal those key challenges and those key gaps in terms of the talent in the organization. And what is this all about? It's really to help us make a decision around whether we can develop the incumbent talent in the organization or whether we will need to go out and source and buy in talent. It's one of the most important retainers in Africa. I'm not sure what the context of that question is. Is D&I a big focus in countries in Africa outside of SA? And I think, Cole, to your point, really this is the key challenge for us in terms of what we found, certainly in the 2022 New Ways of Working study, and it really differs very much from country to country. But generally speaking, D&I was not really such a big focus in countries outside of Africa. I think this is generally speaking, particularly in those countries where you have a more homogeneous population. So really quite different understandings in terms of what people understand diversity and inclusion and equity to be from country to country. To what extent is flexibility on structuring strategy packages impacting attraction and retention? Again, that remains to be seen. I mean, I am not a remuneration and reward specialist at all, but I would imagine flexibility on structuring salary packages will be important for attracting the right kind of talent and maintaining those levels of talent in our organization. Was there no data on insights on diversity and inclusion? Yes, there was data. If you go onto our website and have a look at our New Ways of Working study, you can actually download that report and have a look on the data and insights with regards to diversity and inclusion. We have my question, this is an important one from Peter, and this will be the last question as we will wrap up. Yes, to those who are asking, we will share the presentation as well as a recording of this webinar to you over email when we are done today. My question on how can we access diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment tools. So there are a number of vendors globally who provide these types of tools for us to start to get a gauge on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a wonderful experiment to run for yourself would be to just go onto ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to design a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment tool as a starting point before spending money with an external vendor of assessments. I'm finding that to be able to rapidly prototype HR interventions and programs using ChatGPT as a starting point is really, really instructive. Folks, that is all the time we have for our webinar. I'd like to thank you so much for participating. As mentioned, you will get access to the slides and we will send you the recording. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for your participation. Thank you, Janine. Would you like to say goodbye?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for your time, your participation in the polls. And I would really, I think in terms of the questions that were asked, really encourage you to go and download the report from our website. There's many things that we could not cover in the session. So there might be some useful tips, some useful insights that you can use as an HR professional or as a leader. So besides the presentation that we will share with you, go and look at the actual results from the study that we've done, especially the D&I, especially the top skills that were identified. There's a lot of more information that you will get in the report itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please, thank you so much, Janine. Please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. I'm posting the link in the chat. Let us keep the conversation going over LinkedIn. And with that, we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar, which will be taking place in about 2 weeks' time. And we will identify, or we will let you know about that webinar over email. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.